The cellar door was open 3 inches. That's what I noticed first. Not the light bleeding up from below, not the muffled sound of Eleanor's voice reading something aloud. The door itself. I'd oiled those hinges 2 months ago, and I always kept it latched. Always. My flashlight cut through the darkness at 2 a.m., and I descended those stone steps with the same measured breathing I'd used 1,000 times before jumping into black water to pull drowning strangers from the sea. Calm. Focused. Ready for anything. Except this. Eleanor knelt on a dirt floor beside a man I'd never seen. He sat on a makeshift bed of blankets, gaunt but alert, holding a worn copy of East of Eden that I recognized from our own shelf. My wife looked up at me, not with guilt, not with fear, with something worse. Relief. "I was wondering when you'd find us," she said. The man closed the book slowly. His eyes moved from Eleanor to me, assessing, calculating. I'd seen that look before, in the faces of people clinging to wreckage, figuring their odds. "Before you do anything," he started, "let me—" "How long?" I asked Eleanor. Only Eleanor. She didn't flinch. 8 months. 8 months. The number landed somewhere between my ribs and stayed there. 8 months of dinners together. 8 months of her warm body beside mine in bed. 8 months of a stranger living 100 meters from where we slept. I turned and walked back upstairs without another word. 6 days earlier. The soup cans were off. That's where it started, with 12 cans of tomato soup that should have been sitting on the 3rd shelf of our storage room, except only 7 remained. I'd done this inventory 1,000 times over 10 years, and the numbers always added up. Eleanor and I lived by routine out here. We had to. Crestfall Island sat 11 miles off the Maine coast, accessible only by Captain Roy Jennings' supply boat once a month. The lighthouse had been automated for decades, but the Historical Commission kept a human presence for maintenance and tours during the summer months. It was the kind of job you either took because you were running toward solitude or running away from something else. I was running from both. I wrote the discrepancy in my logbook without mentioning it to Eleanor. 5 cans of soup didn't warrant an accusation, but they warranted attention. I'd spent 15 years in the Coast Guard learning that small anomalies usually meant larger problems. A fraying rope, a loose bolt, a crew member who seemed a little too eager to take night watch alone. That evening, I found Eleanor at the kitchen table, watercolors spread before her, a small seascape emerging on the paper. Grays and blues and the particular white-green of winter surf. She hadn't painted in at least 2 years. "That's beautiful," I said, and meant it. She covered it with her palm like a teenager caught writing in a diary. "It's nothing. Just keeping busy." "Can I see?" "It's not finished." She gathered the supplies quickly. "How was the inventory?" "Same as always." I watched her face for something. Anything. But Eleanor had mastered the art of pleasant neutrality years ago. It was one of the things that had drawn me to her, back when I thought stillness meant peace instead of concealment. Later, while she slept, I went back to the storage room and found a single gray thread caught on the cellar door latch. I pinched it between my fingers and held it up to the light. Wool. Good quality. Neither of us owned anything gray. I put the thread in my pocket and didn't sleep until dawn. The next 4 days, I watched everything. Tuesday, I marked food items with tiny dots of permanent marker. A blue spot on the rice bag, red on the canned goods, black on the bread wrapper. Each night I logged what remained. Each morning I found discrepancies. Someone was taking food. Systematically. Carefully. Just enough to notice if you were looking, invisible if you weren't. Wednesday morning, I woke before dawn and sat at the kitchen table, pretending to read while Eleanor made breakfast. "You're up early," she said, cracking eggs into the pan. "Couldn't sleep. Storm dreams." "The one where you're swimming but can't find the surface?" I nodded, surprised she remembered. We hadn't talked about my nightmares in years. They'd become just another piece of furniture in our marriage. Present, acknowledged, ignored. I used to have those, she said, sliding the eggs onto a plate. Drowning dreams. They stopped after the first year here. Something about being surrounded by water made me stop being afraid of it. What do you dream about now? She paused, spatula in hand. Mostly nothing. Sometimes I dream I'm back in the classroom trying to teach a lesson, but I can't remember the words. The students just sit there, waiting. She shrugged. Silly. Not silly. No? She brought my plate to the table and sat across from me. What's on your mind, Thomas? You've been somewhere else all week. I wanted to ask her about the food, about the gray thread, about whatever secret she was carrying down those cellar stairs. But instead, I said, just the weather. Storm system coming. Jennings might be delayed. We have plenty of supplies. Do we? Something flickered across her face, so fast I might have imagined it. Of course. You did the inventory yourself. Right. I did. We finished breakfast in silence. My first theory shamed me. Eleanor. Isolation did strange things to people. I'd seen lighthouse keepers before us develop hoarding behaviors, squirreling away supplies against some imagined future catastrophe. Mental illness wasn't weakness. It was biology responding to unnatural circumstances. If my wife had started hiding food somewhere, I needed to help her, not confront her. Thursday evening, she made my favorite dinner, cod with roasted potatoes, the way her mother used to prepare it. I fixed her reading lamp, the one with the faulty switch I'd been promising to repair for weeks. We ate by candlelight because she said the overhead fixture was too harsh, and for a few hours it felt like the early days, before the island, before the silence grew thick enough to choke on. Remember when we used to go dancing? She asked, swirling wine in her glass. That little place in Portland with the bad jazz band? Bernie's. They closed 5 years ago. Did they? That's a shame. She stared into her wine. We should do that again sometime. Find somewhere with music. Dance badly in front of strangers. Would you want that? I don't know what I want anymore. She said it without self-pity, just observation. I wake up, I eat breakfast, I walk the shore, I read, I sleep. Repeat. 10 years of repeating. We could take a trip when the weather breaks. You always say that. I mean it this time. She looked at me with something that might have been hope or might have been pity. Do you, Thomas? Do you actually want to leave this island, or do you just think you should want to? I didn't have an answer. Do you ever miss the mainland? She asked. Sometimes. Do you? She considered the question longer than it deserved. I miss the possibility of going somewhere, the option, not necessarily the going itself. We can take a trip when the weather breaks. Portland, maybe. A nice hotel. Maybe. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Let's survive winter first. That night, I pretended to sleep until her breathing deepened, then slipped downstairs and checked my marks. 3 cans gone, a half-pound of rice, the remains of last night's bread. Friday morning, I installed the wildlife camera. We'd bought it 2 summers ago to capture footage of the harbor seals that lounged on the southern rocks. It was small, motion-activated, and had excellent night vision. I positioned it on the storage room shelf, angled toward the door, and covered it with an old rag that left just enough lens visible. Saturday at dawn, I retrieved the memory card and locked myself in the maintenance shed to review the footage. 2:12 a.m. The storage room door opening. Eleanor in her gray robe, moving with practiced efficiency. She gathered canned goods, a thermos, half a loaf of bread. Her movements were quick but calm. She'd done this dozens of times before. Then she turned toward the cellar stairs and disappeared. I watched the footage 3 times. The 4th time, I noticed her expression. Not guilty, Not secretive. Something gentler. The face of a woman on her way to meet someone she cared about. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. 15 years of pulling drowning people from the ocean had taught me to feel things later, after the crisis had passed. Right now, I needed information. I needed to understand what I was dealing with before I decided how to respond. I would follow her tomorrow night. And then I would know. The cellar had been part of the original lighthouse complex, dug in 1847 for root storage. Stone walls 2 feet thick, extending 30 feet into the bedrock. We'd used it exactly twice in 10 years. Once to store old furniture, once to shelter during a hurricane. The air down there was cold and damp and smelled of centuries. I followed Eleanor at a distance, flashlight off, navigating by memory and the faint glow from below. The stairs curved at the bottom, opening into a space I barely recognized. Someone had been living here. A real habitation, not just a hiding spot. Blankets arranged into a proper bed. A small table fashioned from shipping crates. Books stacked neatly against the wall. Our books, I realized. Titles I'd assumed Eleanor had reorganized. A camping lantern cast warm light across the scene, and in that light sat a man I'd never seen before, listening to my wife read aloud from Steinbeck. "I was wondering when you'd find us," she said. The relief in her voice was what undid me. Not relief that the secret was over, relief that she could finally stop pretending. The lie had been a burden, and I had been the one she was carrying it for. The man closed his book and waited. He was maybe late 30s, lean but not starved, with the kind of face that looked honest even when it probably wasn't. His eyes moved between us, calculating odds like a gambler who'd been caught counting cards. "Before you do anything," he started. I cut him off. "How long?" "Thomas," Eleanor began. "How long has this man been living in our cellar?" She held my gaze. 8 months? The number echoed in the stone chamber. 8 months. May through January. A full cycle of seasons while a stranger lived beneath our floor. "Who is he?" The man answered for himself. "My name is Vincent Callahan. Your wife saved my life, Mr. Whitmore. Whatever happens next, I need you to know that." I looked at Eleanor. She didn't defend herself, didn't explain, just waited for whatever came next, the way you wait for a verdict you've already accepted. I turned and walked back upstairs. I sat in the keeper's room until dawn, watching the light sweep across black water. The mechanism turned with mechanical precision, 3 seconds on, 6 seconds off, the same rhythm that had guided ships past these rocks for 150 years. Constant, reliable, indifferent to human drama. Eleanor found me there around 4 a.m. "His name is Vincent Callahan," she said from the doorway. "He was convicted of embezzlement. $4 million from an investment firm in Boston. Except he didn't do it. They all say that." "I know." She stepped into the room but didn't come closer. "He washed up on the South Shore last May. Prison transfer van crashed in a storm, and he swam 2 miles in hypothermic water. When I found him, he was bleeding from his head and couldn't feel his legs. He looked at me and said, 'Please, they'll kill me if they find me.' So you hit him. I was going to get you. I swear to God, Thomas, I was going to come straight to the house and get you. But then he opened his eyes and he was so scared, and I thought, just a few days. Nurse him back to health, figure out what to do. A few days turned into a week turned into a month, and a month turned into 8. She nodded. The lighthouse beam swept across her face, illuminating her in pulses. Light. Dark. Light. Dark. Why didn't you tell me? Because I knew you'd do the right thing. The words carried no accusation, but they landed like one anyway. You'd call the Coast Guard. You'd report him. That's who you are, Thomas. You follow the rules. And maybe that's what I should have let you do, but by the time I realized how deep I was in, I couldn't just hand him over. You've been visiting him, reading to him, bringing him our food. He listens to me. Her voice cracked on the last word. Not half listens while checking the weather gauge. Listens. Do you know how long it's been since someone asked me what I think about a book? About anything? I asked you last week what you thought about the storm forecast. That's not the same thing, and you know it. The accusation sat between us like a third person in the room. I wanted to defend myself, to point out that I'd spent 10 years keeping us alive on this rock, maintaining equipment, coordinating supplies, doing the invisible work that let her paint watercolors and read Steinbeck to a stranger in our cellar. But something stopped me. Some honest part that knew she wasn't entirely wrong. Did you sleep with him? No. No hesitation. No wounded outrage. Just the word. It was never that. It was never going to be that. Then what was it? I don't know. She finally moved closer, sitting in the chair across from mine. Company. Purpose. Someone who needed me to show up. Do you understand how empty the days get when you stop needing me to show up? I understood better than she knew. But admitting it would mean admitting other things. Things I'd spent a decade building walls around. There's a decision to make, I said. We need to call this in. He's a fugitive. I know. They'll arrest you too. Harboring. Accessory after the fact. I know. Are you prepared for that? She looked out at the dark water. I've been preparing for it for 8 months. Every time I walked down those stairs, I thought, this might be the last time. He might be gone. Thomas might have found him. The Coast Guard might show up. But it never happened. And eventually you start to believe you've gotten away with something. Until you haven't. The light swept across us both. 3 seconds on, 6 seconds off. Constant, reliable, indifferent. I'm going to talk to him, I said. Alone. Then I'll decide. Vincent Callahan didn't look like a criminal. He looked like an accountant who'd missed too many meals and spent too many nights sleeping on stone. His handshake was firm but not aggressive, the grip of a man who'd learned to calibrate himself to his circumstances. I appreciate you not calling the authorities immediately, he said. Eleanor told me you'd be fair. Don't confuse deliberation with fairness. I haven't decided anything yet. Of course. He gestured to the makeshift chair across from his bed. Please. This is your house, your cellar. I'm just the trespasser. I sat. The camping lantern cast strange shadows on the stone walls, making the space feel older than it was. Like a medieval dungeon or a monk's cell. Tell me everything, from the beginning, and don't lie to me. I'll know. Vincent nodded slowly. Do you know the name Gregory Hale? No. He was my business partner. Now he's chief of staff to State Senator Patricia Webb, rising star in Massachusetts politics. They're already talking about a gubernatorial run in 3 years. Vincent leaned forward. 8 years ago, Gregory and I started an investment firm together. Small at first, but we had good instincts, good connections. By year 5, we were managing $40 million in client funds. And you stole $4 million of it. I didn't steal anything. Gregory created a series of shell companies and funneled money through them for years. When the auditors got too close, he manufactured evidence that pointed to me. Bank accounts in my name that I'd never opened. Wire transfers I'd never authorized. By the time I understood what was happening, I was already in handcuffs. Every con man has a story about how he was framed. I'm sure they do. Vincent met my gaze without flinching. But most con men don't have recordings of their business partner admitting to the entire scheme during a drunken celebration the night before the arrests. You have recordings? Hidden, on the mainland, along with financial documents, transaction records, and correspondence between Gregory and 3 offshore banks. Everything needed to prove what really happened. The problem was timing. I was arrested before I could make any of it public, and my lawyer, Vincent's expression hardened. Let's say my lawyer was more interested in pleasing powerful people than in defending his client. Why didn't this evidence come out at trial? Because nobody knew it existed except me. I was saving it, building the case. I wanted to be sure before I made accusations against a man with connections. He laughed bitterly. By the time I realized Gregory was going to move first, it was too late. I studied his face for signs of deception. 15 years of interviews and interrogations had taught me the tells, the micro-expressions, the inconsistent details, the stories that got better with each telling. Vincent's account was steady, consistent. Either he was telling the truth or he was the best liar I'd ever encountered. Why does any of this matter to me? You're still a convicted felon. My wife still broke the law. It matters because Gregory Hale is about to become one of the most powerful men in Massachusetts, and the only person who can stop him is sitting in your cellar. That's not my problem. No? Vincent tilted his head. You spent 15 years saving people, Mr. Whitmore. Jumping out of helicopters into freezing water, pulling strangers from sinking boats. And then one day, you stopped. Moved to an island. Disappeared from the world. What happened? My hands tightened on the chair arms. That's none of your business. The Brennan family. 2 parents, 2 children. August 14th, 2015. The date hit me like a physical blow. I hadn't heard it spoken aloud in a decade. You had to choose, Vincent continued, his voice soft now. The elderly couple trapped below deck or the family in the water. You chose the elderly couple because they were closer. You thought you could get back in time. How do you know about that? I recognized you the first week. The news coverage was extensive. The Coast Guard inquiry. The settlement with the family. Vincent held up a hand. Eleanor doesn't know. I never told her. That was your story to tell, not mine. I stood so quickly the chair toppled behind me. Is that a threat? You've been holding this over my head for 8 months, waiting to use it? No. Vincent didn't move, didn't flinch. I've been waiting to see what kind of man you really are, whether the guilt would make you cruel or compassionate. Whether you'd see a fugitive in your cellar as a problem to be solved or a person to be understood. And what have you concluded? That you're still deciding, just like I am, just like Eleanor is. He picked up the copy of East of Eden and turned it over in his hands. We're all trapped on this rock together, Mr. Whitmore. 3 people who made choices they can't undo, trying to figure out what comes next. The only question is whether we face it as enemies or something else. I retrieved my fallen chair and set it upright. My hands were shaking now, the delayed reaction I'd been holding back finally catching up. I need time to think. Of course, I'm not going anywhere. He almost smiled at the absurdity. The storm's coming. We're all stuck here whether we like it or not. The storm arrived 3 days later. Captain Jennings made his final supply run on Friday, the narrow weather window giving him barely 4 hours to unload and depart. I met him at the dock while Eleanor stayed inside, and for the first time in 10 years, I lied to a man I trusted. Everything okay up there? Roy asked, studying my face. You look like you haven't slept in a week. Eleanor's been sick, stomach thing. I've been up with her. She need a doctor. I can radio the mainland, get a chopper out here before the storm hits. No, she's better now, just a bug. Roy nodded, but something in his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. He was 63, barrel-chested, with hands like leather and eyes that missed nothing. He'd been running supplies to Crestfall since before I arrived, and he knew this island, knew us, better than anyone. I've been meaning to ask you something, he said, hauling the last crate of canned goods onto the dock. Your consumption numbers. They've been running a little high these past few months, more than 2 people would typically go through. My stomach tightened. We've had some spoilage issues. Moisture in the storage room. That so? Roy wiped his hands on his jacket. Might want to look into that. Moisture's a slow leak that becomes a flood if you're not careful. I held his gaze, trying to read how much he actually knew. I appreciate the advice. Thomas? His voice dropped. I've known you 10 years. You want to tell me something? I'm listening. You want to keep your business private, that's your right. But storms have a way of shaking things loose. Just something to consider. He climbed back into his boat and was gone before I could formulate a response. The wind started Saturday evening, rising through the night until the keeper's house shook with each gust. 70 mph sustained, with gusts reaching 90. The radio tower took a direct hit around 2 a.m., a piece of debris shearing through the antenna mount, and suddenly we were truly isolated. No communication, no rescue, just the three of us and the storm. Eleanor brought Vincent upstairs for the first time since he'd arrived. He can't stay down there, she said, defying me to argue. The cellar floods in heavy weather. He'll freeze to death. I wanted to object, wanted to maintain some boundary between the fugitive and our home. But she was right, and we both knew it. Vincent emerged blinking into the lamplight like a creature from a cave. He'd cleaned himself up, trimmed his beard, washed his face, and in proper light he looked less like a vagrant and more like a former professional fallen on hard times. Which I supposed was exactly what he was. Thank you, he said simply. I know this isn't easy. It isn't. I handed him a blanket and pointed to the couch. You sleep there. You don't touch anything. You don't go anywhere I can't see you. Understood. We spent the next 48 hours in a kind of surreal domesticity. Eleanor cooked meals while Vincent and I reinforced the windows against the wind. We ate together at the same table. Slept in shifts, someone always watching the house, the lighthouse, the stranger in our living room. Saturday afternoon, while Eleanor napped upstairs, Vincent helped me secure the generator shed. Thank you, he said, holding the plywood while I hammered nails. For not turning me in immediately. Don't thank me yet. I haven't decided anything. Fair enough. He shifted his grip as the wind tried to tear the board from his hands. Can I ask you something personal? You can ask. Why the lighthouse? A man with your skills, your experience, you could have done anything. Why here? I drove another nail before answering. You know why. I know the Brennan family. I don't know why that made you choose isolation over recovery. There's no recovery from what I did. Isn't there? Vincent studied my face. You saved 2 children. You saved an elderly couple. 4 lives because of you. The math isn't as simple as you've made it. Tell that to the parents who drowned. I would if I could. I'd tell them their children survived because of Thomas Whitmore. I'd tell them the alternative, you freezing, drowning, failing to reach anyone, would have meant 6 deaths instead of 2. He let that sit between us. The sea doesn't give you good choices, does it? Just impossible ones. I hammered in silence until the board was secure. My partner used to say something, Vincent continued, back before he became a thief and I became his scapegoat. He said the difference between a hero and a coward is which failures they're willing to live with. Heroes accept the failures that come from trying. Cowards accept the failures that come from standing still. Your partner sounds like a man who'd say anything to get what he wants. He was. He is. But that doesn't make him wrong about everything. The wind howled around us, shaking the shed on its foundation. I thought about the Brennan children, twins, 8 years old when I pulled them from the water, screaming for parents who would never answer. I'd followed their story for a few years afterward. Aunt and uncle in Vermont, good schools, therapy. They were 18 now, if I remembered correctly. Adults with their whole lives ahead of them. Lives I'd given them. Lives I'd orphaned them into. We should get inside, I said. Storm's getting worse. Sunday was worse. The wind peaked sometime after midnight, rattling windows and testing every seal I'd spent a decade maintaining. We huddled in the main room with lanterns and blankets while the lighthouse groaned around us. Tell me about the painting, Vincent said to Eleanor. The one you've been working on. She looked surprised. How did you know about that? I could smell the oils when you came down sometimes, and your fingers. He smiled. Always a trace of blue or green under your nails. I looked at my wife's hands. He was right. A faint smudge of cerulean along her cuticle. It's nothing important, she said. Just seascapes, waves, rocks, the same views I see every day. But you stopped painting for years. What changed? Eleanor glanced at me, then away. I'm not sure. Something about having someone to show them to, maybe. Someone who hadn't seen the same views 1,000 times already. You could have shown them to Thomas. Thomas doesn't look at things the way you do. I should have felt stung by that, but I didn't. She was right. I looked at the ocean like a threat to be managed. Tides to calculate, weather patterns to predict, dangers to anticipate. Eleanor looked at it like a living thing, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. I'd like to see them, I said. Your paintings, if you'd show me. She studied my face for a long moment. Really? Really? Okay. She stood and retrieved a canvas from behind the bookshelf, a seascape, as she'd described, but not the calm scene I'd expected. This was a storm, wild and churning, painted in desperate strokes of gray and green. In the center of the chaos, barely visible, a small figure clung to a piece of driftwood. That's me, she said quietly. That's how it felt, the first year. Like I was drowning in slow motion and no one could see. I took the canvas and held it under the lamplight. The brushwork was frantic, almost violent, but underneath the chaos was technical skill, the kind that came from years of formal training. My wife had been an artist once before I'd dragged her to this rock. It's extraordinary, I said. It's therapy, but thank you. We sat in silence after that, the storm raging outside while something quieter shifted inside. 3 people who'd been strangers, enemies, complications to each other, becoming something else. I didn't have a word for it. Maybe there wasn't one. On Sunday night, Eleanor asked me to sit for a portrait. I've been painting landscapes for months, she said. I want to paint something alive. I sat in the worn armchair by the window while she sketched, the lamp casting warm light across us both. Vincent read quietly in the corner, and for a moment, just a moment, the scene felt almost peaceful. Like a family weathering a storm instead of 3 people drowning in their own secrets. Hold still, Eleanor murmured. You've got this line between your eyebrows that deepens when you're thinking about something hard. I'm always thinking about something hard. I know. That's why I want to capture it. She worked in silence for a while. Outside, the wind howled and waves crashed against the rocks with enough force to feel through the floor. The lighthouse beam kept turning, automated backup systems ensuring it would outlast any failure of human will. The Brennan family, I said finally. The thing Vincent told me about. Eleanor's hand paused over the canvas. I had to choose. There was a pleasure boat taking on water, and I had to choose who to save first. The elderly couple was trapped below deck, going to drown in minutes. The family, 2 parents, 2 little kids, they were in the water, wearing life jackets, holding onto debris. I calculated I could get the couple out and swim back for the others. I calculated wrong. Thomas. The boat shifted. Debris pinned me for almost a minute. By the time I got free and got back, the parents had drowned trying to keep their children's heads above water. I saved the kids. I made them orphans first, but I saved them. Eleanor set down her brush. Her eyes were wet, but she didn't cry. You never told me. I couldn't. I came here to hide from it. Told myself it was for both of us. Fresh start, peaceful life. But it was for me. I was running. From the corner, Vincent spoke quietly. We're quite the collection, aren't we? 3 people who came to this island to disappear. I looked at him, then at Eleanor, then out at the black storm beyond the window. I spent 10 years punishing myself for one bad choice, trying to be so careful, so controlled, that I'd never have to choose again. And now here I am, with another impossible choice in front of me. You could call the Coast Guard, Vincent said. As soon as the radio's fixed, that's the legal answer. Or you could help him, Eleanor added. There's evidence out there that could bring down a corrupt man and free an innocent one. That's the moral answer. They're not always the same thing. No, Vincent closed his book. They're almost never the same thing. That's what makes it a choice. The storm raged on around us. I didn't sleep that night, and I don't think either of them did either. Monday afternoon, the wind finally died. I spent 2 hours on the tower, repairing what I could of the antenna mount with spare parts and frozen fingers. By 4 p.m., I had the radio operational again, and the first thing that came through was a backlog of messages from the Coast Guard. Crestfall Station. This is Coast Guard Sector Northern New England. We've received information that a fugitive, Vincent Callahan, escaped during prison transfer May 2025, may be located at your position. Please confirm receipt and advise status. My finger hovered over the transmit button. Confirm receipt. Call in the professionals. Let the system work the way it was designed to work. It would be so easy. Then I saw the second message. Thomas. Eleanor's voice was tight. Vincent needs to show you something. I climbed down from the tower and found them both in the living room. Vincent held a small phone, a burner, apparently, hidden in his belongings since he'd arrived. I kept it powered off to avoid tracking, he explained, but I charged it during the storm to check for messages from a contact on the mainland. Someone I trust. He handed me the phone. One text, encrypted, from a blocked number. They know where you are. Hale's sending cleaners. Get out. Cleaners? Private contractors, former military, former law enforcement, current mercenaries. Gregory can't afford to let me be taken into normal custody, not now. If I get a lawyer, if I start talking to federal prosecutors, his whole world falls apart. You're saying he's going to kill you? I'm saying he's going to make sure I never testify, whatever that takes. I looked at Eleanor. Her face was pale but determined. There's a Coast Guard cutter en route, I said. The message said they'll arrive tomorrow morning. 18 hours. And if Hale's people get here first? The question hung in the air. I walked to the window and looked out at the calming sea. The lighthouse beam still swept across the water. 3 seconds on, 6 seconds off. Then we have a problem. By nightfall, we had a plan. Vincent would record everything. 3 hours of video testimony covering the embezzlement scheme, Gregory Hale's role, the evidence hidden on the mainland, the prison transfer accident. Every detail, every name, every transaction. If something happened to him, the truth would survive. Eleanor operated the camera while I asked the questions. It wasn't a legal deposition, I wasn't a lawyer, and this wasn't a courtroom. But it was documentation. Proof that Vincent Callahan had spoken before he disappeared. State your name and today's date. Vincent Callahan, January 17th, 2026. You were convicted of embezzlement in Massachusetts in 2023. Do you maintain your innocence? I do. I was framed by my business partner, Gregory Hale, who is currently Chief of Staff to State Senator Patricia Webb. We went through it all. The shell companies, their names, their registration dates, the jurisdictions where they operated behind layers of legal fiction. The wire transfers, amounts, routing numbers, timestamps, the accounts they fed into. Vincent recited figures from memory with the precision of someone who'd spent 3 years in prison, going over every detail, every missed warning sign, every moment he could have stopped the disaster before it swallowed him whole. "Tell me about the recording," I said. "The one you mentioned earlier." It was the night before the auditors arrived. Gregory and I had dinner at his house. His wife was traveling, his kids at school. We opened a bottle of scotch. By midnight, he was drunk enough to celebrate getting away with it. Vincent's expression was distant, cold. He told me he'd been setting me up for 2 years. Insurance, he called it. He explained the whole scheme. Shell companies, offshore accounts, the prosecutor he'd cultivated through years of campaign contributions. All of it, while I sat there with my phone recording every word. "And you didn't go to authorities immediately?" "I planned to. I needed corroboration first. Physical documents, bank records. I was building an airtight case." He laughed bitterly. Gregory moved faster. The auditors arrived Monday. By Wednesday, I was in handcuffs. The location of the physical evidence, a safety deposit box in a bank in Cambridge, the key hidden in a storage unit in Somerville, locker B47, paid 10 years in advance. "Why are you coming forward now?" "Because I'm going to die." Vincent said it without drama, without self-pity. Gregory Hale has sent people to make sure I never testify. And even if the Coast Guard reaches me first, even if I survive the next 24 hours, the system that failed me once will probably fail me again. The only protection I have is the truth, spoken out loud, recorded where it can't be buried. Is there anything else you want to say? Vincent looked at the camera for a long moment. Eleanor Whitmore saved my life. She broke the law to do it, and she should be prosecuted for that. Not because she deserves punishment, but because the law doesn't make exceptions for compassion. Neither does justice. I hope whoever watches this understands that mercy and legality aren't always the same thing. Sometimes you have to choose between them. I stopped the recording. Eleanor was crying silently, and I realized with surprise that my own eyes were wet. "What do we do now?" she asked. "Now you take the footage and hide it. Somewhere only you know. If anything goes wrong tomorrow, you're the failsafe." "And what will you do?" I looked out the window at the dark water. "I'm going to keep my watch." They came at dawn. 2 of them, in a private vessel that moved too fast and sat too low for civilian use. I watched them through binoculars as they approached from the northeast, cutting through the morning chop with military precision. Vincent stood beside me at the window. "Recognize the boat?" "Modified fishing vessel. Shallow draft, high speed. Not standard equipment. They're good at their jobs." Gregory doesn't hire amateurs. I retrieved my hunting rifle from the locked cabinet in the maintenance shed, a bolt action point .308 I'd kept for the occasional deer that swam over from the mainland. I hadn't fired it in 3 years, but the muscle memory was still there. Safety. Chamber. Breathe. "Stay inside," I told Vincent. "No matter what happens." "Thomas, stay inside." I walked down to the dock alone. The boat tied up neatly, and 2 men stepped ashore. Both wore civilian clothes, hiking jackets, work boots, but they moved like soldiers. Trained, alert, dangerous. "Mr. Whitmore?" The taller one spoke first. "We're private investigators working in coordination with Massachusetts authorities. We have reason to believe a fugitive named Vincent Callahan may be present on this island." "You have identification?" He produced a wallet badge that looked official but felt wrong. "We'd like to search the premises." "I'd like to see a warrant." "Sir, this is a matter of urgent public safety." "Then radio the Coast Guard. They're already on their way." I kept my rifle pointed at the ground but visible. "You're on federal property without authorization. I'm within my rights to ask you to leave. The shorter man shifted his weight, hand moving toward his jacket. The taller one noticed and gave a tiny shake of his head. Mr. Whitmore, I don't think you understand the situation. I understand it perfectly. Two armed men show up before the authorities, claiming to be investigators, demanding access to my home. Either you're legitimate, in which case you can wait for the Coast Guard like everyone else, or you're not, in which case you need to leave my island. The taller man studied my face, calculating. Then something flickered in his expression. Recognition. Jesus, Whitmore, Thomas Whitmore. I kept my face neutral. Do I know you? Decker, Paul Decker. We were at the academy together, 94, 95. He almost smiled. You went rescue swimmer. I went different directions. The name triggered a distant memory. A young man with too much ambition and too few scruples. We hadn't been friends. You're a long way from the academy, Paul. We both are. He looked at the rifle, then at the lighthouse, then back at me. The man we're looking for has information that could damage some important people. People who pay well to avoid damage. That sounds like a confession. It sounds like honesty. Something rescue swimmers used to value. He took a step forward. Here's how this works. You tell us where Callahan is. We take him quietly. You go back to your lighthouse and your wife and your isolated little life. No one gets hurt, no one asks questions, and Gregory Hale's friends make sure you're taken care of. And if I refuse? Decker's expression hardened. Then we have a different conversation. One where the Coast Guard arrives to find a tragic accident. Fugitive attacked the lighthouse keeper. Shots were fired. No survivors to contradict the story. You'd kill a fellow rescue swimmer? Former rescue swimmer. You left that life behind, Thomas, just like I did. He shrugged. We all make choices. I raised the rifle, not pointing at anyone, just raised. My choice is to give you 60 seconds to get back on your boat. You won't shoot. I've spent 10 years watching this water. I know every current, every rock, every tide pool. I know exactly where to aim so your body washes out to sea and never comes back. I met his gaze without blinking. You want to test me, Paul? You want to find out if the man who couldn't save the Brennan family has enough left in him to save himself? Decker stared at me for a long moment. The wind coming off the water was bitter cold, and I could see his breath hanging in the air between us. Whatever calculation he was running behind those eyes, I couldn't read it. Then he laughed, short and humorless. You've changed, Whitmore. The man I knew at the academy would never have pointed a rifle at anyone. The man you knew at the academy hadn't watched people drown yet. Fair enough. He held up his hands and took a step back. This isn't over. The cutter's still hours away. A lot can happen in a few hours. Then I'll be watching, every minute, every second. You want to try something, you come back and try it, but know what it'll cost you. His partner was struggling in the water now, the cold sapping his strength faster than either of them had anticipated. Maine water in January wasn't forgiving. You had maybe 15 minutes before hypothermia started shutting down motor function, maybe 30 before it became critical. Your friend's clock is ticking, I said. Might want to help him before he becomes a liability. Decker gave me one last look, something between respect and hatred, then dove off the dock. I kept the rifle ready while he hauled his shivering partner back to the boat. The engine roared to life and they pulled away, not toward the horizon but toward the mainland, fleeing before the authorities could intercept. I stayed on the dock until my legs started to shake, then walked back to the house where Eleanor and Vincent were watching from the window. They'll be back, Vincent said. I know. The Coast Guard won't get here in time. Maybe not. I set down the rifle and looked at both of them. But I've spent 10 years running from a fight I couldn't win. I'm tired of running. The next 6 hours were the longest of my life. Decker's boat maintained a careful distance, close enough to watch, far enough to claim innocent intent if questioned. The Coast Guard cutter reported delays, mechanical issues, rough seas, an estimated arrival pushed back to early afternoon. Every hour that passed felt like a countdown. Eleanor made coffee that none of us drank. Vincent paced the living room, checking his phone for messages that didn't come. I sat by the window with my rifle and watched the water. "There's something I need to tell you," Eleanor said around noon. "Now?" "While I still can." She sat down across from me. "Those 3 miscarriages before we came here. The third one, it wasn't exactly a miscarriage." I looked at her. "I found out I was pregnant right after your hearing, the one about the Brennan family. You were so lost, Thomas, so broken. And I thought, how can I bring a child into this? How can I tie us both to a life when you can barely stand to live yours?" "Eleanor, I made a choice. I told you it was natural. I let you grieve something you never had to grieve. And then we came here, and every year I watched you punish yourself for a decision you made to save 2 lives, while I carried the weight of a decision I made to save. I don't even know what. Our marriage, your sanity, my fear." She was crying now. So was I. "I didn't tell you about Vincent because I didn't know how to tell you the truth about anything anymore. We'd been lying to each other for so long, about why we came here, about what we lost, about what we needed, that one more lie seemed almost necessary, like the only language we had left." I reached across the distance between us and took her hand. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For making you feel like you had to carry all of this alone. For being so trapped in my own guilt that I couldn't see yours." I squeezed her fingers. "For 10 years of being present without being here. Thomas, when this is over, however it ends, I don't want to go back to before. I want something new. Something honest." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'd like that." From his corner, Vincent cleared his throat. "I hate to interrupt, but..." He pointed out the window. The Coast Guard cutter had appeared on the horizon. Still distant, but visible. Coming. And Decker's boat was moving toward shore. "They're going to try before the cutter gets here," I said, grabbing the rifle. "Eleanor, take Vincent to the cellar. Lock the door from inside." "Thomas, no. This is the only way. They want Vincent, and they'll go through me to get him. If I can hold them off long enough for the Coast Guard to arrive, it's over." "And if you can't?" I looked at her. Really looked at her for the first time in years. "Then you take the video evidence and you make sure the world sees it. That's what matters now. Not me. Not Vincent. The truth." She kissed me, fierce and brief and desperate, then grabbed Vincent's arm and pulled him toward the stairs. I stepped outside. Decker and his partner were already on the dock when I emerged, both holding handguns now. No more pretense. "Last chance, Whitmore. Stand aside." "No. The cutter's still 20 minutes out. You can't hold us off that long." "Maybe not." I raised the rifle. "But I can make it expensive." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Decker's partner raised his weapon. I fired. Not at him, at the dock beside his feet, and the shot echoed across the water like thunder. He flinched, stumbled, and went into the water with a splash. Cold enough to hurt. Not cold enough to kill. Decker hesitated. Just for a moment. Just long enough for me to work the bolt and chamber another round. "Your friend can swim," I said. "But he won't last long in that water. You've got maybe 10 minutes to fish him out before hypothermia sets in. Your choice." "You son of a..." "Clock's ticking, Paul." He looked at me, at his floundering partner, at the approaching cutter. The calculation was clear on his face. Murder a federal employee with witnesses incoming, or retreat and fight another day. "This isn't over," he said again. "I'm counting on it. Now get your friend and get out of my water." He dove in. I kept the rifle trained on them both as Decker hauled his partner back to the boat. The engine roared, and they were gone, not toward the horizon but toward the mainland, fleeing before the authorities could intercept. I sat down on the dock, suddenly exhausted, and waited for the cutter to arrive. The next few hours were a blur of uniforms and questions. Vincent surrendered peacefully to Coast Guard custody. He provided a full statement about the intimidation attempt, identifying Decker and his partner, naming Gregory Hale as the likely employer. The video testimony, retrieved from where Eleanor had hidden it in the lighthouse mechanism room, was logged as evidence. Eleanor was questioned about harboring a fugitive. She answered honestly, holding nothing back. The Coast Guard commander, a woman named Patterson with gray hair and tired eyes, listened without judgment and made notes. "You understand we'll have to report this to federal prosecutors," Patterson said. "I understand. Given the circumstances, the rescue, the threat, your cooperation, I doubt they'll push for charges. But I can't promise anything." Eleanor nodded. "I knew the risks when I made my choice. I'm ready to face whatever comes." Patterson looked at me. "And you, Mr. Whitmore? You want to add anything?" I thought about it. About the Brennan family. About 10 years of hiding. About the 2 men I'd driven off that morning. I want to make a formal statement about what happened today. Decker's threat, the attempted assault, everything. And I want it on record that Vincent Callahan may have been wrongly convicted and that powerful people want him silenced before he can prove it. Patterson raised an eyebrow. "That's a serious accusation." "It's a serious situation. Someone should look into it." "Someone will." She closed her notebook. "The Coast Guard appreciates your cooperation, Mr. Whitmore. We'll be in touch about next steps." They took Vincent away on the cutter. He looked back once as the boat pulled away, raising a hand in something that might have been thanks. I waved back. 6 weeks later, we locked the lighthouse door for the last time. The investigation into Gregory Hale had exploded across the news. Federal prosecutors, grand jury subpoenas, a state senator suddenly distancing himself from his ambitious chief of staff. Vincent Callahan's case was under review. The evidence he'd hidden had been recovered, and preliminary reports suggested it supported every claim he'd made. Eleanor's role in harboring him had been quietly declined for prosecution. "Sympathetic circumstances," the U.S. Attorney's Office said. "Cooperation with authorities." We were moving to Portland. Not permanently, we weren't sure about anything permanently, but for a while. There was a therapist Eleanor wanted to see, a support group for Coast Guard families I'd been avoiding for a decade, a chance to figure out if we'd married each other or just our shared solitude. The last thing Eleanor did before leaving was hang one of her paintings in the keeper's quarters. A watercolor of 3 figures on a rocky shore, 2 standing, 1 sitting. The faces were vague, impressionistic, but the body language was clear. Connection, tension, something unresolved. "You're not taking it?" "It belongs here." She touched the frame lightly. "Let whoever comes next wonder about it." I looked at the painting for a long moment. Then I picked up our bags and walked to the door. Captain Jennings was waiting at the dock, his weathered boat rocking gently in the calm harbor. "Never thought I'd see the day," he said, helping us aboard. 10 years of convincing you to take a vacation, and it takes a fugitive in your cellar to finally get you off this rock. Funny how that works." "You know," he said, untying the mooring lines, "I knew something was wrong for months. The supply numbers never added up. I kept waiting for you to say something, to ask for help." He shook his head. "Some things a man has to figure out on his own, I suppose." "Would you have reported us, if I hadn't come to you first?" Roy was quiet for a moment, hands working the rope with practiced ease. "I like to think I would have talked to you first, given you a chance to explain. But honestly, I don't know. That's the thing about choices. You never really know what you do until you're standing in the moment. The boat pulled away from the shore. I watched the lighthouse shrink in the distance, the tower, the keeper's house, the rocky cliffs where Vincent had washed ashore almost a year ago. The light still turned, automated now, keeping its ancient watch over empty waters. Eleanor took my hand. "What are you thinking?" she asked. I watched the lighthouse until it disappeared over the horizon. "I'm thinking we should stop in Cambridge on the way. Visit that bank where Vincent hid his evidence. Buy him a beer when this is all over. You want to stay in touch with him? He's the reason we finally had to look at each other. Seems rude not to say thanks." She laughed. A real laugh, the first I'd heard from her in months. "You're a strange man, Thomas Whitmore. I married a woman who hid a fugitive in our cellar for 8 months. What does that say about you?" "That I have excellent taste in project husbands." The mainland came into view. Trees, buildings, roads, people. A world we'd turned our backs on for a decade, now spreading out before us like an offer we were finally ready to accept. I squeezed Eleanor's hand and didn't let go. Some secrets don't end when they're told. They just change shape, becoming something you can almost learn to live with. This one changed into a phone call 3 months later. Vincent Callahan, charges dropped, calling from a payphone in Boston to say Gregory Hale had been indicted on 17 counts of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. It changed into a postcard from Eleanor's therapist's office, stuck to our refrigerator. Progress isn't the absence of problems. It's the presence of hope. It changed into a conversation on a rainy Tuesday night when Eleanor finally told me everything about our third pregnancy, and I held her while she cried, and neither of us pretended things were fine when they weren't. It changed into a trip back to Crestfall Island the following summer, just to check on the lighthouse, just to stand on the dock where I'd faced down 2 armed men with a hunting rifle and a decade of guilt. The painting was still there, hanging in the keeper's quarters. 3 figures on a rocky shore, 2 standing, 1 sitting. Eleanor stood next to me, looking at it. "You ever going to tell me which one is you?" I asked. "Does it matter?" "I suppose not." We locked up and headed home. The light kept turning behind us. 3 seconds on. 6 seconds off. Constant. Reliable. Finally, at peace.